Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited today to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast from Osaka in Japan, Scott Allan, who's a renowned author, publisher, and a transformational growth expert. Scott has not only authored over 30 books on topics like mindset, resilience, and personal mastery, but he's also transformed his passion for writing into a thriving publishing business that spans multiple languages and all across the globe. So, welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, Scott. It's a real privilege to have you as my guest.
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
Now, Scott, I'm really looking forward to exploring your journey. And obviously, it's a bit of a fascinating one because you don't look Japanese, but you've lived in Japan for quite a long time,
Mm.
starting there in the corporate world and then becoming a key influencer in self help areas and professional development areas and building a global publishing empire. So I'm really looking forward to exploring all of that. Before we do that, though, what's the impact you're aiming to make in the world?
The impact I'm looking to make in the world is to help people to achieve, to figure out what their big dream is and then to go after it and help them to achieve it. So if I could help 1 million people achieve that, that would be fantastic.
Hmm. That's a pretty clear mission statement. 1 million is maybe a bit light. I'm hoping we can actually reach more people than that directly or indirectly.
Yeah, I'll
So,
settle for 1 million, but I prefer to go more like 1 billion is actually my goal. But
yeah.
we'll start
Okay.
with
Well, now we're talking.
right, we'll start with 1 million. Yeah.
All right. So a million's the milestone, a billion's the aim.
For sure.
Excellent. All right. So you've spent, I think you wrote somewhere that you've spent over 10,000 hours researching confidence and mindset in its various forms. So, what are some of the common misconceptions that we all have about developing a strong mindset?
I think one of the misconceptions is that the mindset is something that just is going to happen naturally by default if we just keep working hard in our jobs and from there I think we tend to fall into not a rut, but people get stuck in the way that they're doing things. We all do. We get we get into our habits, into our routines, and then our mindset is just one of those things that if it's not growing, it becomes fixed. And when it becomes very fixed, then it's a lot difficult to learn new stuff. So one of the practices that I still do to this day is I'll spend 1 hour a day learning something. So whether that's through books
Mhm.
or audiobooks, podcasts, talking to other people, I'm always learning something new. And this may be just one new thing that I can apply to, both my life and my business, my relationships, maybe apply it to financial wealth. But the goal, for the reason I think why the mindset is so critical, is because, it really, to me, it's the guiding light that's going to be pushing you forward, towards your goals, towards your greatest potential. Because if we're not working on, and it's not just mindset, there's other things that go into it as well. There's, we have to also build our physical self as well. And then there's the spiritual self. But the mindset is that one thing where you do have control over it. And if you don't have control over it, chances are you're allowing it to be controlled and manipulated by
Mm.
external forces. So just important to you have to act with intention. You have to intentionally decide that you want to be a person who is just practicing which is a continuous and never ending improvement. So
Yeah. Which is pretty much a Japanese philosophy, right?
yeah,
um,
yeah, I think it has
so,
something.
so on,
Ikigai, I think, is probably the philosophy
yeah,
comes from,
that's right. Yeah.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting because coming back to your background, and you spent years in the corporate world where I'm guessing you were stationed in Japan, but you can correct me on that or you can give us some more background on that. But clearly, um, developing flexibility there and thriving in a culture that is very foreign to people that
Mm,
grew up in the West and have never been exposed to those sort of cultures before. Um, the a flexible mindset and a mindset of adapting and learning is really important there.
mm.
So talk us through a little bit of some of the lessons that you learned and some of the ways that um, yeah, you adapted to that, and how you then ended up staying there
Mm.
post your corporate career.
Yeah, that's interesting because having lived here for a long time, I've met thousands of people, not just Japanese people, but a lot of people who came here from all over the world, really. And people adapt to the culture differently. Maybe depends on the culture they're going into. But I found that this culture, especially, it seemed to have a time limit for a lot of people, and for most people, it was like 1 to 3 years. Now,
Mm.
this depends. Some people just did not adapt to it very well, and they become very, I'll say, negative just because their mindset was like, why can't they do things this way? Why are they, this is how we do things back in Kansas. And I'm like, well, we're not in Kansas anymore. This is how they do things here. So my mindset was always like, I wasn't copying people and just like trying to learn everything about the culture to become Japanese. But the thing is that if your mindset is, I'm going to learn everything I can about the culture because I want to make better relationships with people. I want to open up more opportunities. I want to thrive here and I want to do something with my life that's never been done before, maybe by myself or by somebody else. So that was just my mindset
Mm.
going into it. And I think that a lot of it really helped me through a lot of, with work and relationships and everything. So one of the things that I did when I first got here is I couldn't speak a lick of the language. I didn't study it when I was in Canada. I really just prepared to come here, got on a plane, got off the plane, and and it was just go time, and that was it. But I got
Yeah.
right into it though. I mean, I just I adapted very quickly, and I hadn't really done a lot of traveling prior to that. So I've been here about 25, 26 years, but I hadn't traveled around very much, and coming here was really one of the, I'll call it, like, outside of Canada and the US, was really the first country I'd visited. So it
Mm.
was not really culture shock, to be honest. It was an adventure for me. I just loved it,
Mm.
and I did from the beginning. And sure, there were challenging times, learning to drive on the left side of the road, which apparently that's an important thing because that caused me to get into an accident on day 3. And
Oh.
yeah, learning the language was important. But what I found is that you didn't have to learn the language; you could get by without it. But it was just one of those things that really interested me. So I got right into it. I ended up, signing up for Japanese classes, made a lot of friends, and because of I think my adaptability to learning about the culture and the different traditions they had, and learning about the tea ceremony, I got back into karate, and I just became very active. But I think that I'd always been that way to a certain extent. So um, all the some of the things that challenged other people weren't as challenging for me. Now I had my own challenges, perhaps, but I think that it was just because my mindset is always, well, I'm always willing to learn new things to adapt to any situation. I was able to just go into any work environment, and no matter what it was, I could thrive there, or at the very least I could survive. But in a lot of cases, I was
Yeah.
able to thrive in the business world that I was in. So
Mm. Yeah, it's fascinating, and I guess Japan. I mean, for me, I spent a lot of time traveling in my corporate career, and Japan was one of the places I traveled quite a bit to. I always enjoyed going to Japan because to me it felt like one of the most developed countries in the world, and
mm,
you could go walking on the street and it was very safe.
mm,
One of the things I did learn, though, in all of the travels that I did, if you made a little bit of an effort to learn about the language,
mm,
the history of the place, the culture of the place. Why do they eat raw fish, for example? Just little questions like that, and show that interest in a genuine way, not for any manipulative purpose, but really genuinely be interested in that just opened doors to relationships and to better outcomes from a business sense as well.
yeah. No, yeah, you're absolutely right, and that's exactly it. They were not expecting you to speak any Japanese, so if you spoke a little bit
Hmm.
of it, they were really impressed. So
Yeah.
it's like, wow, this is great. So what happens if I learn even more? So I just try to get better and better at it, and as I got better at it, the expectations increased, but that was okay. It kept challenging me to, it wasn't
Mm.
just the language, but there's also the understanding how they communicate without saying anything too. There was
Yeah, yeah.
whether you're in business or in relationships, there's always those challenges too. Although the gestures that they make, the hand gestures, are very different from the gestures we make. So
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, so yeah, yeah. There's
Yeah, the
yeah, yeah.
The other thing I always found very challenging, and Japan, like you say, you can get away with not speaking the language. You can get away with English, and I certainly could get away with the driving on the wrong side of the road isn't relevant to me because we drive on the right side of the road, if you like,
Yeah.
the left side. So that's not a change. But the one thing that struck me as soon as you got out of the big cities in Japan, and certainly in a lot of the other Asian countries,
Mm,
you didn't necessarily need to get out of the big cities, was the signs were all in the local
hmm
script, the local characters. And I was always struck by, okay, I'm in this foreign country. I can't speak the language. That's a real handicap for me.
hmm
And and yet a lot of people speak English, and they were quite happy
yeah,
to test out their English on me, and because they were keen to improve their English. So the communication on the verbal uh, level kind of worked most of the time, and when you got into pantomime, everybody had fun, so that worked as well.
yeah.
But when I had to read signs or read maps that were all in characters, I thought, man, I'm illiterate. This is what it feels like to not
Mhm.
be able to read, and that was a very humbling feeling. So I'm guessing that the next level of learning the language was learning the kanji characters.
Yeah, no, that's great insight. That's actually it. And I do spend and have spent a lot of time outside the cities. In fact, the city I'm in is not like it's Okayama City, so it's not a big city. But when I first moved here, a lot of the signs were still only in Japanese, and now
Hmm.
they're mostly in English and Japanese. But when you get into the rural areas, which is just that you go 10 minutes out of town and you're into one, you see less and less of that, right? So it certainly does help to read it. And what's interesting too is being in the train stations. I was in, so I'm about an hour outside of Osaka, but I was in Osaka recently. In the you go into the trains actually, and like it's train platforms still have a lot of the like the directions and everything are all in Japanese. So it depends where you're at, but that's one thing is like trying to figure out a complicated train system or subway system, but then having
Hmm.
it be and the kanji is really complex. Like it's, because not only do you have to know where you're going, you have to be able to read the signs to see where you're going. So
Yeah.
I even to this day, though, I still get lost all the time on the trains. I end up on some loop for like an hour and I have to find my way back. Uh,
Yeah.
so that still happens, but you know what? I just look at it as all part of the journey. It's just,
It's part of the adventure, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well, the Japanese train system, I had an experience once, and I thought this just epitomizes the Japanese train system and the efficiency of Japan in general. And it was we were building a research center on the outskirts of Tokyo, so it was about 3 hours outside of central Tokyo.
Mm,
And the place that they put me up at, when I went there for the first time, the place they put me up was a small village. There was about a 40-minute train ride
mm,
to this local area, and our local lab manager called me up the night before. I arrived in the evening, and he said, "Look, I'll meet you at the trains. I'll meet you on the train tomorrow. What you need to do is go to platform number 3, let's say,
mm,
take the 7:37 train heading to whatever the name of the town was, and I will meet you on the train. And then at the other side, there'll be a courtesy bus take us out to the new
mm,
research centre." So I thought, okay, that sounds fine. So the next morning, I had walked down to the station. It was walking distance. Platform 3, 7:37. Sure enough, 3 minutes before train pulls in,
mhm,
I get on the train, sit down. Train takes off right on 7:37, and I thought, wow, this is pretty easy.
mm,
And then I waited. I waited for this chap to turn up, and it was before mobile phones, by the way. So um, we had no way of getting in touch
mm,
directly there. Anyway, 5 or 10 minutes into the train ride, this chap finds me. So he's walking through the carriages. He finds me, sits down next to me, and he says to me, "Oh, I made a mistake. This train isn't express to some station beyond where we're going.
Mm,
So we have to get out at the next station, change trains to one that's going to stop at the station we need to get off."
yeah.
And I thought to myself, wow, that is so amazing that he relied on the fact that if I followed the instructions, he knew exactly where I would be,
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
and that he could then catch me and
Yeah.
and correct the mistake that we're on the wrong train. And I thought, there's not many places you'd be able to do that.
For sure, yeah. And what's interesting, like you mentioned, the train leaving at 7:37. If you arrive there at 7:38, you've just missed the train because they do leave on
Yeah,
time. It's interesting when you see the conductors there. Literally, like they'll look at their watch every minute, and they keep putting their arm
yeah,
and checking it. Like those last 3 minutes leading up until it departs. Yeah, they're right on track. So, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. No,
yeah,
I
pretty
still find
amazing.
all that it
All right,
fascinating.
well,
Yeah. So,
how did you transition from the
mm,
corporate career that you had there into writing and
mm.
publishing?
Yeah. So I've always had a fascination with, like, I always knew I was going to be an author ever since I was probably in junior high school. I just loved books and I was always reading books. I was reading, like, grew up with like a lot of Stephen King and Dean Koontz and a lot of other authors, of course. But yeah, I remember reading Pet Cemetery when I was like 11 years old and just always coming up with, and Christine and all the Stephen King favorites. And I always just was coming up with story ideas. That's probably why I struggled with school a lot, because I was the one who was daydreaming, staring up the window, dreaming up the next, how can I get to Mars concept. So anyway, fast forward a few years though, but I was really a fiction author, and then I didn't publish anything in fiction, or I haven't published anything yet. Um, but yeah, I've always been like, I would say I got onto the path for the self help and the personal development really began around when I was about 24, 25 years old, going back about 30 years, because I just needed it at the time when I just needed to make a change in my life. So I started, someone introduced me to, it wasn't a Tony Robbins book, but it was a book by an author called Hal Urban, and he had a book called 20 Ways to Change Your Life or something like that. But I just loved it. Like, it was the first time I'd read a self help book, and what I liked about it is that it made me start to think about things. So that led into something else and something else, and I just did more reading, and that's actually how I got to Japan, because I was able to change my mindset, change my life, make a decision that this is what I want to do. Got here, and then after I was here for about, I think, about 10 years, I realized, like, oh yeah, well, now that I've come here and I'm living the dream still, I think it's time to, and again, like, I was probably, this was going back about 15 years ago, and I decided to start writing again. And I remember one day just coming up with an idea for a book, sat down, started outlining it, putting it together, spent about 3 or 4 years just creating content. Really, it doesn't sound very exciting, but, and maybe it wasn't, but
Hmm.
it just shows, like, I would just show up consistently most days, put in the time for the writing. And a lot of this too, I was just writing stuff out by hand and making, creating journals and everything. So the thing is, after a few years, I had what I thought was one book actually was more like 3 or 4 books. So by the time Amazon rolled out their self-publishing platform back in 2012 or 2013, I was all ready to go. I just needed a cover design. I had to find an editor, and I'd never done these things before, or hired people online or anything like that. And I didn't know anybody else who did either. So I was kind of figuring stuff out.
Hmm.
And like people that started publishing their books, like self-publishing them, without having to spend tens of thousands of dollars. Now we had this other avenue we could use, and I'd already been pitching my books to publishers as well, and getting a few rejection letters too. So that wasn't a good experience. But yeah, that's so I started that, but I was still, I still had my day job, and I had a young family, and so I had, I had to go to my day job every day, and in order to get the writing done, I had to wake up early, which I wasn't crazy about, but I did it. I would wake up at like 4:30, 5 a.m. some days. I'd work for about 90 minutes in the morning before my kids got up, and then we had to get them off to school. And then I go to my day job, and I would, you know, like hit Starbucks on the way to work for half hour. And so every time I had like a half hour or 1 hour, I had some pocket of time, I was working on like the next book, right? So that was just how I was
mm,
able to maintain momentum. I just had a lot of ideas, and I just couldn't stop, I guess. And to be honest, I still can't. So, you know, uh, obviously,
yeah.
yeah, so I've created a lot of content, done a lot of workshops around the content as well. But what I just love about the whole like publishing process is just first of all, as a content creator, I just love creating content and putting out there and just getting feedback from people, seeing how it can change people's lives. I've gotten a few emails over the years where people, express their gratitude for the work that I was putting out there. Not everybody loved the work, but that's okay. Like, I take constructive feedback as well. And if somebody says I didn't like something because, and they give me a reason, I'll go and, try and make that thing better, and then just,
Mm,
revise it and keep pushing forward. So,
mm. Yeah, well, one of the things I mean, clearly you put in a lot of hard work and hard yards until you got to the point where things started to happen and you started being successful. And I guess the bonus of there's actually enough content there for 3 or 4 books
mhm.
was a bonus at that point in time. Um, and you talked about rejection a couple of times there, and
Mm,
obviously there are some failures there. What's been your approach to that rejection and that failure? Because coming back to what you said earlier, I guess that sort of learning mindset is important in that, isn't it? And at the
mm,
same time,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
you need to have a certain resilience to say, well,
Mm,
this is what I want to do, and I think I can make a difference in doing this. So how do I adapt?
yeah. Yeah, that's interesting because so from the beginning, I didn't have a lot of expectations. In fact, I didn't when I first published my like the first couple of books, they weren't that great. The covers, like the books that I published back then, or I've probably since taken them down, rebranded them and relaunched them under maybe different titles and changed everything really. But I had to launch those initial books just to get things moving. And the thing is, I didn't have a lot of expectations. I wasn't I desired to be a New York Times bestselling author, but that wasn't, if I didn't, that was okay. And to be honest, I wasn't even expecting to sell any books. In fact, when I published my first few books, don't even think I told anybody about it except maybe my family, and a couple of friends, right?
Mm.
They'd always ask me, yeah, have you been selling any books lately? And, I was like, no, not really. But they were out there. And I don't even think I had a paperback. I think I just had like the digital version of it, So,
Mm.
but anyway, yeah, I wanted to keep moving forward with it though. And what happened is that, I started getting some email because I had my email in the book. I think, if you want to, any questions, reach out to Scott Allan at da da da. And people actually did start reaching out to me. I was like, oh, wow, like my first few fans, and I just thought it was, again,
Mm.
I always treated the writing as, my job was my job and that was it. And then writing was like my hobby, right? So I
Mm.
wasn't thinking of it as a business, and I think I'd achieved my goal of publishing a book. But the thing is like I had this other idea for a book, and I just put it together, put it out there. And at the time, the book was called "Do It Scared," and people just loved the title and everything like that. Again, I had no expectations. I came up with the idea for the book based on my experiences with rejection, overcoming fear, right? And resilience is part of that because if you want to get anything done, you've got to feel the fear and do it anyway, like Susan Jeffers' book. And then "Do It Scared" was just I put together a really good book, I think, and I put it out there, and it just kind of took off, which I wasn't expecting. And by that I mean, like, I went from making a few dollars a month to making like a couple of thousand or a few thousand. And when I started getting
Mm. Oh,
what I thought was good money, I was like, wow, okay, I wasn't expecting this. Now what do I do? Do I?
yeah.
And I was talking to one of my, I think it was a mentor or coach at the time. And he's like, well, you got to put another book out there. You got to, fuel the fire. And I was like, yeah, you're right. So I put together Relaunch Your Life and put that out there, and that did even better. So again, I think it was
Mm.
just that people really like and it's kind of like, once they pick up one of your books, they may go back and pick up the other ones as
Yeah.
well. If anybody knows Dan Brown, who put out the Da Vinci Code, well, the thing is, he'd done
Mm,
4 books previously, and nobody had really heard of them before. They weren't New York Times
mm,
bestsellers. They were just, they were good books, but they didn't actually hit the real charts until he had the big hit with his Da Vinci Code book,
yeah.
right? So anyway, point is though, like, yeah, I just put out the other book, and by that time I kind of started figuring out a little bit about the marketing, whereas I knew like selling products in the marketplace. I used to have a little eBay business, so I knew how to sell stuff online, but this was a different thing. And it wasn't really on social media. So there were a lot of things that I had to learn, but I just took it one step at a time. And I realized like, okay, if I'm going to make this work, I've got to come up with like, better content, do more research. And that's what I did. I just went all in. So now I went from like, still had my day job, still had my, family still needed a lot of attention, right? So I still had these two things. I realized like I need more time. I got to put more time in this, not just a couple hours a day. So I still was waking up early in the morning, staying up later at night, and throughout the day, I learned like, wow, actually, a lot of people say that they don't have time to do the things they want to do, and I get it. Time is a constraint, but I figured out like I was able to get like 4 or 5 hours of extra work in by working on this one thing because I really wanted it to happen. So working in
Mm,
coffee shops or my lunch hour, whatever it was, I was able to just pocket everything together. And yeah, I was able to, like by 2019, I was able to finally just quit my day job and do this full time. So it's a combination of doing coaching, creating like yes, building the publishing business and everything like that. But yeah, when I look back, I realized like it all started with a decision one day when I said I'm finally going to sit down and write that book, because up to that point I was kind of telling people I was going to do it, and it was just like one of those things I was going to do someday. And
mm.
the months and years went by, and all those some days add up, and I still hadn't accomplished anything. But what I was doing, I was reading a lot of books on how to write books, and that was pretty much it. I learned a lot from it,
Yeah,
by the way, but I was just like, okay, I'm kind of like, I'm not really,
yeah.
I'm faking it. I'm not being the real writer. I'm
Mm,
just telling people I'm writing a book when in fact I'm just kind of messing around. So when I really got down to it, and I'll tell you, like, I mean, there's nothing like for anybody. It doesn't matter if you're putting out a song or an album, or you're doing art or whatever it is. But when you create that thing and you put it out there, it's like, there's this feeling like, I finally did it. I accomplished that
mm.
thing. And then if you want to do it again, you can just rinse and repeat it and maybe just try and do something better the next time. So,
Good. Yeah,
mm,
yeah. In some ways, it's kind of the transition from I'm writing a book
mm,
to making I'm a writer or I'm an author
mm.
part of your identity, which is so much more powerful, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a great point. Exactly. Building the identity was key. Glad you mentioned that, because there was certainly a lot of imposter syndrome in the beginning. Sometimes there still is, but that is something that holds a lot of people back. But the imposter syndrome, it has a sort of kind of a negative reputation, right? But it's actually a good thing, because if you feel like you're an imposter at something, like I felt like I was an imposter when it came to writing, but that was only because I hadn't proven to myself yet that I could actually do it. So when you start to do something that you've never done before, you're going to feel like an imposter, because that's just, you haven't built that identity yet.
Mm,
It's going to be that way with any skill, whether you're trying to be a musician, an author, an artist, or, so you're going to feel that way, but that's a good thing. The imposter syndrome will eventually go away once you get better at that thing. And then when you try a new thing again, you're going to, if I tried playing, like I don't play basketball, but I'm sure if I tried playing basketball, I'd probably feel like an imposter,
yeah,
like that. But anyway, good point though. Yeah. I like that,
yeah.
because it just proves that if you can build the identity, and that was actually the key, now that you mention it, is like when I was putting that first book together, like, again, I worked on this for a few years, but so what I did to build this identity and make it real, I had to visualize this so strongly that I had to manifest
Mm,
the reality before it became a reality. I remember putting together like cover concepts, even though at the time we didn't even have like a lot of online resources where you can just like pay someone $20 to do a cover. So I would actually just print stuff off of Google or whatever, like images, and put it together myself and put my name on it. and a book
Yeah.
by, and I put this up on my wall.
Yeah.
I had to make it a real thing, and I actually have those. I still have a lot of those covers I put together, like especially for the fiction books. But that made it
Mm.
real because it's like, oh yeah, that's what I'm working on. I'd have my outline or to for the books, like in note. I had tons of notebooks and stuff like that. But that was all
Yeah.
part of building the identity. I just had to, and that was kind of why, because at the time, I was, in corporation teaching business English, and that was my identity. And the book thing was my hobby. And to
Probably,
make
yeah.
that identity switch was actually very difficult. But I realized, like, when I did it, it was like I had to go all in with the writing. I had to choose one or
Mm.
the other. I felt like I was living in two worlds, and I was also working like 18 hours a day between
Yeah.
coaching and writing and doing, not getting a lot of sleep.
Mm.
So, I guess when I left, I just made the decision, like, I have to go all in on this. So, and that was it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah, and it's a fascinating way to visualize. I remember Joey Coleman, author of Never Lose a Customer Again and Never Lose an Employee Again. I
Mm,
think two of his books. Um, he was on the show a little while back, and he told a story of one of the most profound gifts that he ever got from his wife was a package, and there were 5 books in the package, and each book was it was just some random book,
mm,
but it was actually a physical book, but it was in a wrapper with a handwritten
mhm,
sort of bit of artistic sketching on it, and each title of books that he'd obviously talked to his wife about publishing in the future, but each
mm,
title was on there, Never Lose a Customer Again by Joey
mm,
Coleman and Never Lose an Employee Again and all that.
mm,
And he said that moment was, first of all, so powerful because there was this really clear demonstration how deeply his wife cared about
mm,
his success and his vision
mm,
and shared that. And then the second thing of kind of seeing it in a physical form of something that really kind of just made it so real.
yeah, yeah. No, that's a great story. Yeah, exactly. So, I have a vision board in the other room, and it's a little different from the one I started out with years ago. But I'm a big believer in having a vision board, just so every night before going to bed, I'll spend like 10 minutes just in front of it, looking at like the things I want to create, and also having a vision for your life, and also having an anti-vision as well. Like I used to imagine, what would it be like if like what will it be like if I don't achieve this? Like what, like in 20 years from now, I'll still be sitting, at my desk in the corporation, kind of doing the same thing and doing other, and I kind of like put myself in that situation 20 years later, not being, like an author, not having my own business, and not living the dream. And that really hurt. So when I had that anti-vision of that, that was actually more of a powerful motivator than the vision itself of doing that thing. So,
Yeah, yeah, I can relate to that. It's interesting. I reflect back on my corporate career, and I said I was really lucky in that I had I worked for a pretty good company, and I had a global I had a series of global roles. I kind of advanced in both status and responsibility and salary, of course, to match, and had met a whole lot of wonderful people all around the world. I was exposed to different cultures, got to travel everywhere, and really enjoyed what I was doing in about 7 or 8 different roles I had throughout a 23-year career at that company. But the last 2 years, I really dreaded going to work.
mm,
And it was almost like a switch had happened. And it took me quite some time to actually realize what was going on. And I kind of wasn't, I was just so busy and so nose to the grindstone that I didn't really take any time for myself to reflect on what was going on for me personally. But basically, it came down to the fact that I wasn't fulfilled anymore.
mm,
I didn't see a future in the role I had or in the company,
mm,
and I felt underappreciated
mm,
and underutilized. So that once I got to that realization is okay. So what are my options? I need to
mm,
take some
mm,
action here. Yeah,
mm,
but yeah, it's that's the big aha moment when that happens, isn't it? And it's kind of that anti-vision, I think, is a good way to look at that.
Yeah. No,
Because had I done that beforehand, I might have recognised it earlier.
right, right. Yeah. No, it certainly is. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people are, in jobs that they don't like or really hate, whether either way, whether situation you're in. But thing is, I think a lot of people know what they don't want, but it's
Mm.
sort of like, what do you want, right? Because I hear people, and I've done the same thing where it's like, I don't want this, I don't like this, and that kind of just becomes, like you'll just get more of that. You'll get more of the things you don't like, and the more of
Yeah,
it,
because you're focused on that. Yeah.
we're just focused on that. But I'm just always focused on the things that, not that the everything that I just want for myself, but everything that I want for the people that I'm, trying to help in the world. And whether that's like
Mm.
friends, family, people that I haven't even met yet, those are the people that I really want to, because by helping them, I feel like I'm building something that's real, like it's because
Mm.
people are going to remember, like, oh, yeah, I read that book by, or I took his course, or whether they took your workshop or somehow they connected with you. And sometimes you just have to say one thing to
Mm.
change someone's life, So, um,
Yeah.
I just say that because I mean, a lot of the stuff that I watch and listen to, um, not on Netflix, but just like through podcasts and things like that, where I'm actually
Yeah.
like learning real world skills. And sometimes someone will just say something, I'm like, yeah, that just really clicks with me,
Mm.
So yeah.
Yeah. It comes back a little bit to the sort of triggered a thought in my mind, the imposter syndrome we were talking about earlier.
Mm-mm.
And it's often we underestimate how powerful some insight that we have can be
Mm-mm.
in changing somebody else's life. And I've had this experience so many times where I'll be working with somebody, they'll be looking over my shoulder, and I'll be working with them on something, and all of a sudden they'll say, "Oh, that's amazing.
Mm-mm.
How did you do that?" And my reaction will be, "What do you mean?
Mm-mm.
I'm not even sure what you're talking about." I might have just clicked a button on the mouse, or typed in a command on the computer, or
Mm-mm.
I don't know, maybe a keyboard shortcut or something like that, something that I think is quite trivial until they react, and then actually they have to point it out to me. What is it that grabbed your attention there? And I realize that is something that I take for granted. Never even give it a thought. I do it automatically, and somebody else thinks it's absolutely amazing and thinks there's huge value in me explaining how I do that.
Mm-mm.
And so there's so many things like that, I think, in every one of us,
Mm-mm.
that's well worth reflecting on. And that comes back then to, if we share that, we can make a difference in somebody else's life or business.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's a great point, because I look at things that other people are doing that I want to do, and I'm like, how did they do that? How did
Mm.
they get to that level? And when you actually hear their story, you realize, well, at some micro level, they just started doing that thing. Let's just say, for example, like somebody who's an international, like global speaker, Mel Robbins or Tony Robbins, or like whoever
Mm.
you choose, right? But I look at that and I'm like, wow, how did they do that? And you realize, like, well, they probably started like a long time ago getting really good at speaking skills.
Mm.
Maybe they started out with a smaller audience of like 10 people in a room, and it's not like an overnight success either, right? So,
That's right. Yeah.
and I'm sure that they had imposter syndrome and they had rejection and all these things, but those are the challenges, and that may come across as like an obstacle in the road, but it's really just you're supposed to experience those things on the journey, because
Mm.
I don't know of any, we'll call it a success story, I don't know of any success stories where it's like, oh yeah, I started doing this thing, got really successful, made a bunch of money, and now I'm retired. It's never like, it's not like a
Yeah.
clean story. There's got to be we want to hear about the challenges, we want to know about the
Mm.
struggles, right? And I think that's really,
That's right. Because,
yeah,
yeah, because that's where the lessons are, really, isn't it?
yeah, yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. So I'm always interested in, like, when someone says, "Oh yeah, so and so, they've got so much success and whatever," and I'm always like, Actually, I'll just give you a quick example. So, my boy loves Mr. Beast, and he's like, he's always listening, like watching Mr. Beast videos. He's like, and I said, well, what do you know about Mr. Beast? Because I've studied a little bit about his business and how he got there and stuff like that. And he's like, well, he's really rich. I'm like, okay, but yeah, right. How did he get rich? And that's kind of like, he didn't know, of course, So I was like, well, he
Yeah.
did this, this, and this. And when you start to go back, it's like, he started with a concept, an idea, and then over the years, yes, he developed like $1 million, maybe $1 billion company now. I don't know, but and I'm just using Mr. Beast as an example. But we tend to focus on the big picture, like they're really rich and famous and
Mm.
stuff like that. But I'm always under the like, my question is like, how did they get there? I want to know the
Yeah.
journey, right? Because when you start to break it down, you realize like, oh, so they're not actually doing anything that was like extraordinary. I mean, sometimes they might be, but they probably just showed
Mm.
up to, let's just say, use an analogy of, they just showed up to play, and they just showed up every day and got better at it. So, and maybe they had that vision in their mind, like I want to have that thing, and they just kept working towards that vision. So, yeah.
Mm. Yeah, that's a really good point. It's I can't remember um, the exact saying, but it's something along the lines of an overnight success actually takes a long time to achieve.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm
Yeah.
also, I think, I don't remember if I got this from Jim Rohn or Tony Robbins, but, if you're not in control of your destiny, then somebody else is. Or,
Mm.
um, so it was something like that. And I've always just, or if you don't have a plan for your life, someone else has a plan for it. And that,
Yeah.
when I first read that like decades ago, that was like that. So then that's an example of one of those things that just stuck with me. And it always
Mm.
bothered me when I would say that, like, yeah, if you don't have a plan for your life, somebody else does. And I never liked the thought of like somebody else having a plan
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
my life, even though like a lot of people, like, yeah, we, fell into that probably and just got into a job and started, living life by
Mm.
default. But I realized, like, really wanted to have my own thing. So, which means I've got to have a plan and I've got to have a vision for executing it every day, every month, every year. So,
Mm. Yeah, great point. And I think we could go on talking about the self development and
mm,
these journeys for ages, but I'm just aware of the time. So I
sure.
think it's a good point on that note to move on to the buzz, which is our innovation round. It's the same 5 questions I ask of every guest, and the idea is you'll give us some really insightful, snappy answers that'll inspire the listener to go and take some action as a result today.
All right.
So you all set?
I'm ready.
Okay. What's the number one thing anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
Be more innovative. I think that they have to spend time with themselves. So what I mean by that is like they have to spend 15, 20 minutes or 30 minutes a day. You can decide how much time you need, but just spending some time alone in your space, doing some thinking without having anything else around you that's distracting. Like, you don't need to have your phone near you. You don't need to have the TV on. You just need to have that, call it quality time alone. And I think it's something that
Mm.
a lot of people don't do. So that's one thing. But I do actually have a second thing to that, second answer for that. For me, that's one thing. But the other thing, actually, to be honest, is physical exercise, working out. I get my
Mhm.
best ideas when I'm literally at the gym. It never fails every time. I'm on the bench
Yeah.
press, or because I've been lifting weights for a long time. But about 15, 20 minutes into my session, I start getting ideas, right? When I'm running on the treadmill, which I don't love to do that, but I mean, if I'm there and it's there, I'm going to jump on it. But when I got my heart pumping and everything, like my brain starts just becomes really active. I start to get these innovative ideas. And it's like, oh, that'd be a great idea. That's a great title for that book, or that's like,
Mm.
I should go and do this. And so I actually carry, not every day, but like a lot of days, I'll carry a pen and paper with me while I'm working out because
Yeah.
I don't like to have my phone with me. I know people have their phones with them, and I just find it distracting. But I get these ideas, these innovative ideas all the time when I'm exercising, and then I'll come home and have my quiet reflection time, probably at night before going to bed, where I'm going to be like, oh yeah, I had that idea today, and I'll think on it. So
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Well, we've answered 2 questions in one there because the second question was gonna be, "What's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?" I think we've covered that one.
well,
I
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
and actually it is working out for sure. But the other thing is doing a lot of mind mapping. So I have sketchboard.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I have
Love it.
sketchboards. Like I have sketch pads all over the place. And what
Yeah,
I
yeah.
do is I'll come up with an idea for not even of like an idea, but like let's just say I'm putting together my website, for example, and it's like, okay, you need ideas for the website, and I'll just make a mind map for it, and I'll have that
Mm.
either on a sketchboard or sticky notes on my wall, and that way I can just I feel creative. Like to me, it feels like a very creative act to be doing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I love it. Well, we've got two things in common there. So I get a lot of my ideas when I'm out riding my bike on my own or
Mm,
hiking on my own.
mm,
Now, usually if I'm riding my bike on my own, I don't want to stop to write down a note.
mm,
So what I do, I've recently invested in a smartwatch, and I can audio activate, so I can say
mhm.
open, hey, hey, Bixby, I think it is on the Samsung, activate the recorder, and I just record whatever's just come into my head, and then I can revisit that when I'm at home.
Yeah.
And the same when I'm hiking, because usually I've got my camera with me there, so I'm focused on
Mm,
photographing and seeing things as well, and ideas will pop into my head all the time there.
yeah.
And then usually I look at the idea when I get home and I start to mind map it.
Yeah.
So there we go.
Well, that's great. I love that. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. All right. Now, what's a favorite resource you use most often?
Oh wow, favorite resource. Let's see. Probably I don't want to say YouTube, but actually, so it depends really what I'm like where I get what I'm learning at the time. So favorite
Hmm.
resources. I'm going to start with audiobooks. Actually, we'll say books and
Mhm.
audiobooks, but lately I'm finding that audiobooks are just easier for me to retain the information. And what I do actually, here's an idea for anybody who wants to try this out. If I really like a book and I want to learn from it, I will get the audiobook and I'll buy the paperback. So as I'm listening to the audiobook, I'm just following through with the paperback or hardcover, whatever
Hmm.
it is, and I'm highlighting areas of the text that really stand out to me. So I'm actually going through like Robert Greene's book on mastery. I've had the paperback for years and I haven't read it. Right, amazing book,
Hmm.
and everybody tells me that. I'm like, yeah, I got to read that book someday. I didn't start going through it till literally this week when I got the audiobook. And as I'm listening to the audiobook, I'm just actually going through the book and now on like page 40. It's a big book, right? But that's just an example. So that's one thing I do.
Hmm.
And yes, on YouTube, by the way, I'll watch a podcast every day for most of them are like 1 hour, maybe 2 hours. So I might have to split it up between 2 days. But Jay Shetty, for example, Tom Bilyeu, could be Mel Robbins, but it's usually a podcast that is, yeah, related to personal development. And it's also a skill that not that I'm not just learning it for myself, but I also want to teach it to other people as well. So I'll watch the
Hmm.
podcast, get some ideas from it, and that just sparks my innovation. And honestly, like a lot of my book ideas come from that too. It just always comes from like, learning from other people. What are they working on?
Yeah.
What worked for them? What didn't work for them? So
Hmm. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, and I love that idea of yeah, highlight using the physical book together with the audio book, because I've done that occasionally, and yeah, it does make a bit of a difference.
mm,
It also forces you to actually shut everything else down. You're really focused on it. Whereas I tend to, if I'm listening to an audio book, I often do it while I'm doing something else,
mm,
and then sometimes you miss stuff. Particularly if I'm driving, for example, I miss stuff because all of a sudden I've got to concentrate really hard on what's going on because there's heavier traffic or whatever's going on.
yeah, yeah. No, that's interesting. I
Mm,
actually, I've tried listening to audiobooks when I'm driving. I can't because that's why I actually I listen to it while I'm going through the paperback because I'm actually
mm,
focused on the words on the paper, although I'm listening to it
yeah,
focused on the words on the paper. And I realized lately when I'm listening to just the audiobook, I tend to start doing something else, right?
yeah,
Hard to just kind of sit there and listen to it. So I've got to focus. I got to be focused on something. So yeah.
yeah. Great. All right. Now, what's the best way to keep a client on track when you're working with someone in a coaching capacity?
Yeah, keeping people on track. So first of all, yeah, I work with a lot of people in coaching. So one of the things that I do with them is like just be very clear and specific on what are the action steps that you're working on every day. And for that, they need to have their goal. So give you an example because a lot of the people I work with are writing books. So first of all, they need to be clear on what their idea is, and then what's going to be your action process every day. So as long as they're clear on what it is that they're aiming for and they have a plan to show up and get that thing done, then they should be able to stay focused and on track.
Mm.
Um, I think a lot of people just we all get I we all get distracted, but the truth is like
Yeah.
I think distractions are not something where they've been around forever. It's just that we seem to think that we have more distractions these days. Maybe we do, but truth is, I think our minds just are so prone to multitasking these days from all the information
Yeah. Yeah.
thing that we've trained ourselves to chase after a lot of the shiny
Yeah. We look
objects.
for the distractions. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But I just
Mm.
like what I do for myself just to stay on track. And I share this with other people is, every night before I go to bed, I'll write down those 3 things that I want to get done the next day. The reason I
Mm.
do them the night before is because when I go to bed, subconscious mind is working on it. When I get up in the morning, I'm out of bed within 5 minutes. It's go time. I'm just like, I get my protein into me. I don't touch coffee until about 8 a.m., 9 a.m. because, you still have that acid buildup that you got to flush out of your system in the first 3 hours. So I kind of have a process that I go through when I get up in the morning.
Mm.
You start work early, but I want to be as productive as I can. But having that clarity on what it is you're working on, and this comes from the experience of not having clarity and just being all over the place for years. For years,
Yeah.
I did that. I realized, like, yeah, if you can just focus in on like that one thing for whether it's like half an hour, and maybe do the hard thing first as well in that first hour.
Mm.
The rest of the days, just it's going to be a lot easier for you to navigate. So yeah.
Mm. Mm. Great. All right. Final question of the buzz round. The number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves.
Wow. Okay. So I'm going to say, so here's the thing, right? It's like when you want to differentiate yourself from the crowd, instead of creating a product, I'm just going to use product as an example. So, let's just
Hmm.
say that you are, you create something and you're like, you try to sell that thing online, right? And I see people doing this all the time, right? So they want to sell their book, they want to sell their product. It's like, well, look at it this way. Like, okay, I'm going to go back to Mr. Beast as an example. And I'm not an expert on Mr. Beast, but I'm just saying, like, the one thing he's done really well is that he's become the brand. He is the niche. He is the brand in this business. Yes, he has a lot of products. And to be honest with you, I couldn't tell you what one of his products is, but I know a lot about Mr. Beast because I've watched some of his videos and I've studied a little bit about, how he put his business together. So what I'm saying is like, you know, um, treat your own life's journey as if you are like, you're not just building a business, like you are your own business, if that makes sense. Like,
Mm.
you're here to you know create something that I think, no, first of all, nobody has what you have because you're your own self. So if you think of yourself as your own individual business, then that means like you become the brand for yourself. So what I mean by that is, when I get onto podcast interviews or I'm talking to people, I'm always like sharing my stories, sharing the journey, because I
Mm.
want other people to learn from that, but also for them to realize that they can just open up and be themselves. And I think that's a big part of it too. Like differentiating yourself is like realizing like, I'm not perfect. I make mistakes, and I go through a lot of I had to work through a lot of obstacles like rejection and failure and all this, and just letting people know that, right? And realizing like, because for
Mm.
the longest time I did, and I would just hide it away, and saying, yeah,
Yeah.
I don't really have any issues with whatever it is I'm working on. I can make this work. But the truth is like there was a struggle for a good many years, and just letting people know that, so yeah. Anyway, I think the final thing with differentiating yourself is just allowing yourself to be who you are. And so, one of the things that I
Mm.
love about, I think Mel Robbins actually has this in her, probably in one of her books, but it's something she talks about all the time, is spending time in front of the mirror, having a conversation with yourself first thing in the morning. I know that's uncomfortable, but if you actually do it, it really just opens you up to the day, and it opens you up to more ideas and creativity. Having like a 5 minute conversation with you in front of the mirror. I'd
Mm.
recommend a clean mirror. Mine wasn't very clean when I started that. I just keep it nice and shiny. And to me, like that was just how that differentiates you, is because I think a lot of people don't do that, right? So,
Mm.
and that's one thing that,
And if they do, they're beating up on themselves all the time,
yeah,
right? They're saying you're a failure,
yeah,
you're this, and they're labeling themselves in a negative way.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, but yeah, there's a lot of people that ways that people can differentiate themselves from others. But I think just being yourself, I mean, right
Mm.
there, you're already different. Like, first of all, as Gary V would probably say, Gary Vaynerchuk, he'd probably say, like, like there's nobody else on earth like you. And I don't know if Gary said that. I think I've heard him talk about it, but there really is
Yeah.
nobody else on earth like you. So, you already have an advantage, right? And now you can just lean harder into that, like just make yourself like create such an amazing life for yourself. And that was really like I don't know if it was my goal, but it was one of the things that I wanted to do, was just create such a great life that at the end of it I'm able to look back and go, yeah, like there are no regrets. Like, sure, there are a few things that I would have done differently, whatever, but hey, that was part of the journey. I just want to be able to look
Mm.
back and reflect on that someday. So,
Mm. Yeah, that's great advice. And I think that self acceptance and self knowledge, to be comfortable with being who you are
mm,
and leaning into that, and accepting all the flaws that come with that, because we're all human.
hmm,
None of us are perfect.
not yet, not until AI, becomes part of our.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure about that either. I
Yeah,
was trying out the new Meta one today, and it kept giving me an answer that I didn't like. So
right,
I
right,
I went back to it and I said, "Seriously, is that all you've got?"
yeah,
I love having a conversation with these things.
for sure. Yeah, it's just testing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Scott. This has been a great conversation. Now, where can people find out more about you, about the work you do, about all your books, and maybe even get in touch and say thanks for what you've shared today?
sure. Yeah, so they can get in touch. Email is Scott Allan at scottallanpublishing.com. We have a website at scottallanpublishing.com, and a Shopify store set up for selling everything direct with merchandising coming soon at scottallanbooks.com. So a couple of URLs there. And of course, they can always go to Amazon. If they plug in Scott Allan Books or author, you can probably find a platform on there as well. And
Hmm.
there's always good old fashioned
Excellent.
Google.
Yeah,
Yeah,
excellent. All right. Well, we'll make it easy for people. We'll put all those links in the show notes.
fantastic.
So, yeah, as we wrap it up, Scott, what action would you like our listener to take out of our conversation today?
Yeah. Yeah. I think if you have something that you really want to do, not maybe it might be an interest in something, but there's something that you've always wanted to do, and you're not doing that one thing, and it's really eating away at you. Just take some time, sit down, do a mind map, right? Start making some notes on what it is, because that's how you start to develop the interest. You've got to turn your mild interest into a passion, and then eventually maybe your passion might become an obsession. I don't know, but you've got to start with something, right? So, well, I hear a lot of people say, I don't really know what I want in life, and that's all part of the process. That's fine, but
Hmm.
you have to spend time, not just researching it, but really like looking. I think, not to sound like woo woo, but going deep within yourself and really just asking some of those hard questions, like, what is it that I
Yeah.
really love? Like, and whatever that thing is, like, everybody's got something, right? And just make there's, you don't have to have the whole plan figured out. Just
Hmm.
take one step. Everything begins with one step. It really is like, the
Yeah. Yeah.
first step of every journey is that one step. Well, that really is it. So whether that's starting to journal something, or you're making a phone call, or whatever it may be, but that's going to lead into another step, another step. Soon you're going to be connecting the dots. And
Hmm.
before you know it, a year later, 2 years later, 5 years later, you never know where you're going to be. But I think
That's right. Yeah.
if you continue to do the same things over and over again, it's pretty easy to predict your future. So,
Yeah. Yeah. So you have a decreasing circle.
mm,
Yeah. I'm reminded of the Chinese proverb that says, is it, I don't know whether it was uh, Confucius might have said this one, or it might be attributed to Confucius, that a journey of 10,000 steps begins with a single, or 10,000 miles begins with a single step.
mm,
And the other one I remember, and I don't know who this quote is from, but I just loved it when I first heard it. And that was, you don't have to be great to start, but you do have to start
mm.
to be great.
Yeah, I love that one for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is so
Yeah.
true.
All right. Well, thanks so much for sharing your time and your insights so generously today, Scott. I've really enjoyed our conversation and learned a lot about your journey and about all things book published. Well, more about producing books and the writing mechanism that the approach that you take. So thanks for sharing that. Really loved it, and all the best for the future. And please do stay in touch.
For sure, definitely. Yes. Amazing conversation today. Thank you for having me on the show.